on this edition of the Self-Publishing Show.
And not everyone can do it. It took me quite a long time to be able to take criticism. But these days, I don't mind that at all. Actually, I find it very helpful.
You're crap.
Thank you very much.
Publishing is changing. No more gatekeepers. No more barriers. No one standing between you and your readers. Do you want to make a living from your writing? Join indie bestseller Mark Dawson and first-time author James Blatch as they shine a light on the secrets of self-publishing success. This is the Self-Publishing Show. There's never been a better time to be a writer.
Hello and welcome. It is the Self-Publishing Show with me, James Blatch.
And me, Mark Dawson.
So we have an episode today we are dedicating to self-publishing fundamentals, a good place to start. We haven't done this sort of thing since the early days of the show when we used to do a lot about mailing lists and everything, the bits and pieces that you should have in place. But it's so important to have a solid platform on which to build. And the earlier you grasp all this, the better. You might be further down the line, but I think some of the fundamentals we're going to talk about today will be useful. But before all of that, Marcus, we have a bit of housekeeping.
Yes, James, make your bed. It's filthy. So we have a Patreon subscriber. So thank you very much to Eleanor Ball from Derbyshire in the UK, who has joined the several hundred people who are very generous and support us on Patreon, support the podcast. So thank you very much to Eleanor, and thank you to everyone else who continues to help us get this show out on Fridays. We haven't missed one yet, have we? In 300 and...
Oh no, we've come close a few times. It is fraught at the moment. I know we're busy at both ends. You've got house guests, you're Ukrainian. I also don't like using the word refugee, but people have been displaced from their homes in Ukraine and are living.
Technically they are refugees, but we call them guests. So
guests,
they are our Ukrainian guests, or our new friends, as I call them.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's going quite well. We had it's Oksana and Roman, so a mum and son, and they've been here a week. And it was Roman's first day at school today, so he's gone to the same school that my son Samuel goes to, in the same class, and they've really the school's been amazing. They've really pushed the boat out for him. There's a Russian speaker, one of the teachers, and I think she was with him all morning as he got settled in, and he just did a half day, then went home. But from what I've been told, he came back really happy. He doesn't speak English, so new school, dressed up in a new uniform, in a different country with no one. He doesn't know anybody apart from Samuel. And it seems like he did really well. So that's really great to hear.
That's really excellent, and well done to the school. Well done to you, in fact, and Lucy for taking that on. There's a lot on. Yeah, Ukraine's still going along. My TikTok account still is something that I sort of tuned into, obviously, because I'm military aviation. There's a lot going on military-wise in Ukraine. I hate to say that I'm exploiting the war I'm just covering it because it's something I'm interested in. The people I think are interested in military aviation read up on all the details, but things fall into your lap occasionally. So yesterday I did a piece on how feasible it would be to just basically give the Ukrainian Air Force Western fighters like the Typhoon, the F-15, the F-16, because as an outsider, I would have thought virtually impossible. They're very complicated, these machines. You can't hop out from one into another and expect to operate it in all the weapon systems. But Greg Bagwell, who's a very senior air marshal, I knew him when he was just a group captain. He wrote an article yesterday saying actually it is feasible and it would only take a few weeks to convert from a Sukhoi or a MiG into one of the Western fighters. So I did that yesterday, got quite a bit of traffic on that. And then this morning, the UK Foreign Minister, Liz Truss, said for the first time, any Western leader, I think we should be giving warplanes to the Ukrainians. So today's one has really gone well for me on TikTok, because I followed that up. Although TikTok, I have noticed more than any other social media platform, is this short attention span of people. So, most people have said, this is ridiculous. You can't just go from one from a MiG to an F-15. I said, well, look at my previous post. And then the next person says, you can't just go from a MiG to an F-15. So, well, look what Greg Bagwell says. I
don't think people look at the comments, do they? I think it's unusual. I'm no kind of power user, far from it. I look at it TikTok now and again, but to actually look at the comments on something, even on you, I look at yours occasionally because I enjoy seeing how people are battering you. But most people, I don't think, look at the comments, so no. they won't have known what you did yesterday.
No.
It's not really. It's just serving more video content after more video content, and not necessarily linking back to what you've done before. So, yeah.
Anyway,
it's frustrating, but anyway.
Yeah, it is. It's an interesting experience. I'm enjoying it, and I need to do a few more book-linked things soon. Okay, right. We're going to move on to today's topics. There's no interview today. Mark and I are going to talk through some of the fundamentals that you must have in place to be a commercial success as a writer, we believe. Actually, before we start on the notes that you and I've put together here, Mark, I just want to talk about something that's happened to me since I've published my novel, which is a few people, friends, have inevitably said that thing that friends say to you when you've written a book is, I think there's a book in me. Right, there's a book in everyone, right? So people say that. One of my friends has actually started writing, which is good. But something I have noticed is when you're at the very beginning of your writing career, if you decide that you want to be a writer, I think most of the time people think that what they want to write is literary fiction. And they don't think very obviously about genre fiction. And I'm not quite sure why this is, but it just seems in the conversations I have, everyone describes the book that they're going to write, and it's a long, rambling saga about a man who spends his life searching for the thing that was actually in front of him right at the beginning of the book. They don't really talk about writing a spy book or a romance or so on. But in the self-publishing world, it's very difficult, I think, to be a very successful literary fiction author. It's much more likely that you're going to earn your bread and learn your trade as a genre fiction author. Now, that might sound really obvious to you and me and to lots of people, but actually in the conversations I have with people outside our world who want to start writing, it's not obvious at all to them. And they think that they're probably going to write this novel. It's going to be a bit like Ian McEwan or something. And I will have the secret juice of how they're going to be commercially successful selling that. And it's worth just pointing out, isn't there? You need to start thinking about genre fiction, I think.
Yeah, I think so too. And I think most people, I probably started off that way thinking I was going to write something that would win prizes, and was quickly disabused of that notion when it just didn't come naturally to me. And those books, in my early traditionally published books, were just pretty dreadful, really. And it was only when I got into writing the genre fiction that I enjoyed the writing process more, and probably not by coincidence started selling more books as well. So I don't know why that is. I mean, I think it might be, you could speculate that it could be the people who think about writing without really getting into what needs to be done tend to be perhaps the kinds of people who are a little bit more head in the clouds, maybe, and perhaps that's the kind of thing that they like to read. They might not, they might not even admit to enjoying the new Lee Child book or the new Barbara Freethy or whatever. It might well be that they don't feel that those kinds of books are the kinds of things that they would want to tell their friends about, which is a bit silly. But it's hard to say, really, isn't it? I don't know any successful. Well, no, I don't know many successful literary fiction writers who self-publish. It is possible. I mean, the principles that we teach in the 101 course, they're applicable to all genres. This is not a course that's just for romance writers or thriller writers. It's applicable to people who want to sell books, full stop. But I think the audience, well, I know the audiences are for literary fiction are smaller in the self-publishing space than they are for the genres. And I think it is kind of set up to it's a little easier to find readers in those genres, and it's more difficult to sell books in literary fiction. Not impossible, but it's definitely more difficult. Yeah.
It is an interesting thing, isn't it? This difference between literary fiction and fiction. And we've talked in the past about genre fiction, about defining it. And if you look at the Booker Prize, and probably the Pulitzer might be the same in America, the Booker Prize here in the UK, it is generally filled with people writing literary fiction, and those authors get quoted in the papers a lot. But actually, if you said to somebody on the street, name 10 authors, they probably might struggle to name 10, but they're likely to come up, I think, with John le Carré and Ian Fleming, Agatha Christie, and they're all genre fiction authors, right? Barbara Cartland, even Charles Dickens, maybe, I don't know. No, maybe not Dickens, maybe he's literary, but...
Well, no.
Conan Doyle. I mean, if you come up with the most famous authors from history, there's lots and lots of
Rowling.
Yeah, lots and lots of genre fiction authors there. It's just not something we need to be snobby about. But I see it is something that, I don't know, for whatever reason. Anyway, so understanding what genre fiction is a really good place to start. If you haven't started writing yet, you're playing about with writing or playing with ideas. And I think what's the best advice, Mark, I think reading into the genre is a really, really important thing, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it's possible to kind of reverse engineer a genre and that you don't read because you want to write something in that genre because you think it's commercial. It's possible to do that. I'm not entirely sure I'd recommend it. I think, I've said this before, I tried, after my first 2 books bombed, when they were published by Macmillan, I thought, well, I'll write something deliberately commercial. I couldn't be more commercial. I found something else that my editor had published, and I read it and I thought, this is rubbish. I can definitely write better than this. And it was completely wrong of me to say that because I couldn't write that book as, which was a fast-paced read, is exciting. It definitely ticked all the boxes. I couldn't write that. And the fact that I was kind of having to force myself to write something that I wasn't familiar with made the whole writing process miserable. So I didn't even enjoy it. So I didn't enjoy it. The book was rubbish. It was even more rubbish than the first 2. It never got published. Thankfully I haven't got it anymore. And I've only found success when I've kind of edged into genres that I do enjoy reading, and there is also a market for those books amongst readers, and I found that sweet spot, and I've kind of stayed in those with small diversions into different connected genres, but I've stayed in that rough area ever since.
Yeah. Okay. Well, look, let's move forward then. So let's assume that you have started writing, you finished your draft, you've done your editing. We're not going to talk about that process here today. We're going to talk about marketing. And in this episode, we're going to talk about the platform that you need to build. And we're going to start with what we call the book package. So this is an expression I really got to hear most by watching Susie K. Quinn's course, How to Write a Bestseller. She talks about the book package. What is that? Well, it's the cover, the blurb, the taglines. And each one of those carries an important task in making sure your book is going to get in front of the right readers and be successful. And if you get one of them wrong, or you get them slightly wrong, that can be the difference between any money you put into paid advertising, for instance, working or not working. So we're going to start with the cover. What is the number one role of the cover, Mark Dawson?
Well, it depends what the context is, but if you're in a bookshop, it's to get someone to reach up, pick the book up and look at it. If you're on a social media platform, it's to stop them scrolling. If it's on Amazon, it's to encourage a click. It'll be the first thing that they see. And then, closely followed by things like title, author name, all of that. Certainly on Amazon, but it's the first thing that they see. So it's the most important at that particular stage is to get someone to investigate more, and they won't do that if your cover doesn't work.
Okay, so let's say you like reading spy thrillers and you go onto Amazon. So the role of the cover to get you to click, to get you to show interest, is it's got to say to somebody, this is a spy thriller book. It's a really fundamental thing. It has to say it. And I know it sounds really obvious, but you'll be surprised how often we see in our groups people posting in covers saying, I've written this book. What do you think about the cover? And people will start saying, well, I think it's, it doesn't look right here and there. But the fundamental thing is, at a glance, within less than a second, Stuart Bache thinks it's less than a second, does this say to somebody who reads that sort of book, this is one of those books? So it's a really basic thing the cover needs to do. It needs to say to somebody, you like reading bully romance, you like reading MI6 thrillers, you like reading science fiction. That's what this book is. At a glance, it's got to say that.
Yeah, and also just to kind of get a bit more context to that, is if you're advertising it, then you've chosen keywords that will ensure that book or that cover is shown to people who like those, who have an interest in those keywords. So if I'm bidding on spy thriller as a keyword and my cover does not look like a spy thriller, then that's a wasted click. So at that point, if you look at the equation, that the person who's clicked on who's been shown that ad is someone who is Amazon or Facebook knows is interested in that particular keyword. So you need to to complete your part of the equation, you've got to present them with something that meets those expectations. So if you don't do that, if there's any kind of incongruence, then you won't get a click, or if you do get a click, it's unlikely to lead to a sale because they'll find something that doesn't match up with quite what they're expecting.
Yeah. that you're going to hear this as a recurring theme, that meeting the expectations and aligning is a really good word to use here. So I would say when you talk to your cover designer, or if you do it yourself, remember that some of the details that you might think are important in telling the story are not relevant to the cover. The cover has this job to do of simply saying to somebody that this is the type of book they like to read. So I've recently, I've changed the cover of my book, The Final Flight. The first cover I loved. It was brilliant. It will sit on my wall. I'm going to order a framed copy to go there. But I noticed, having marketed it for quite a while now through Facebook ads and looking at the charts, look at the also bought, the people buying my book bought a certain type of book, and they all had a very similar cover, and it didn't look like mine. It always had a vehicle on the front. So if it was helicopters, the helicopter was prominent. If it was ships and fighter pilots and fighters, whatever. Whereas I had a bit more of a thriller-like cover. So I went back to Stuart, told him this. He agreed completely and has done me a fabulous looking new cover that fits much better into that genre expectation. So that's a key thing that you need to do. Another thing I'm going to say is your cover must look pro. And sometimes people will upload their covers into our groups and say, what do you think of this? And they'll get some hard truths, won't they, Mark? Because it's important, this.
Yeah, there've been a few recently where, and it's no real. I'm not having a go at the authors who post this, because they're often too close to the project to be able to be objective about things. But you do see people posting covers that absolutely will not sell them books, and you actually. Although I always encourage people to be kind when they feedback with their thoughts, you'd be doing them a disservice if you didn't say honestly that you didn't think that this cover is going to sell many books, because they think that it will. And I've been in this situation before. I've definitely had back in the early days kind of BS before Stuart. I had covers that I thought looked great, and I'd specified exactly what I wanted, and the artist had done a really good job in delivering to that brief, but they didn't look anything like that they didn't hit the tropes. They didn't match expectations that readers would expect to see in covers for those kinds of books. And as a result, it doesn't matter how good my advertising was, you can't sell it. It's too much of a hurdle to get over. So you have to meet the expectations. And going into a group like the SPF community or any of our kind of paid groups that come with the courses, you will get really objective, sometimes brutal, and that's not a bad thing, criticism on what is right or wrong about your cover. And I had something the other day, can't remember who, I think actually may have been on our podcast last week. I listened to Benedict Brown, and he said one of the things that you really need to do one of the things he learned at his when he did his degree was the ability to take criticism. And it is really important, and not everyone can do it. I certainly, it took me quite a long time to be able to take criticism, but these days, I don't mind that at all. Actually, I find it very helpful.
You're crap.
Thank you very much. I know I am. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, you took that well. Well done.
I did take that well.
Yeah. Yes. So it's got to look pro, and our top tips we'll leave you with on covers. So I think I would just say on that, just follow that, is don't be too prescriptive with your cover designer about this. Give them obviously the gist of the book, and the genre is absolutely critical for them. Give them some parallel authors, but let them do the rest of it. Don't come back and say, "Well, no, I'd like 3 people on the cover," because there's always going to be 3 people in most of my scenes. That's irrelevant.
That's nonsense. I've seen. I know that I won't kind of broach any confidences here, but I've spoken to a few cover designers over the years, and I know that's one of the things that they hate.
Yes,
and it is stupid, because I've seen that. Again, I'm not going to be too specific here, but there was a cover in the community not long ago, a swords and sorcery kind of fantasy cover, and there was quite a long discussion about whether the sword was long enough. And it's as Stuart Chip said that no, the reader will not bother with that. Or no, it's even when you get even stupider sometimes with, the character in the book has blue eyes and the model on the cover has brown eyes. And really, there is no point at all in worrying about that, because just think about it as a reader. You're not going to if the cover's done its job, if you actually buy the book, right? Once you've bought the book, you're into the world, and then it doesn't really matter. You probably won't look at the cover and go, "Oh, do you know what? I'm really disgusted that cover does not reflect exactly how the character is described in the book." It's not relevant. At that point, the cover's done its job, and the baton has now been passed to you as the author. So it's up to you at that point to keep the reader reading through the book and then and enjoying it enough to buy the next one. Cover at that point is pretty much irrelevant. So, you
barely see it these days when you read on a Kindle. I mean, it's sort of in hazy black and white. If you set it to be the cover, which you have to do on the Kindle, you might not ever see it again.
That's true. Yeah, I agree.
Okay, so to sum up, fit in, don't stand out is something that Stuart's one of his mantras that says, people say, I want my cover to look different, to stand out. And actually Stuart says, no, you don't really. You want your cover to fit in and be very easy, immediately identified as something that someone who rips through other series. If they read Mark, they rip through Mark's books, your covers should look a bit like that, not too much like Mark's, he'll get angry. And how do you make sure that's the case? Look at the top 10s and the genre you're writing. Look at the big authors who you're emulating, who you think readers would like to come onto your books, and see what their covers are like. That's how you're going to tell what's happening at the moment. And of course, that does change over time. Trends change.
Okay, but not as much as you think it does.
No, true.
If you look at some of the kind of in my genre anyway, the kind of man walking into the distance, that's been constant for years now.
Yeah,
years, ever since I've been writing, that hasn't really changed much. So yeah, things do. They kind of gradually pivot over time, but it's kind of glacial. So
yeah,
I
think maybe in some of those wacky subgenres of sort of the anime inspired subgenres, I think sometimes those trends change quite quickly. But yes, in the bigger subgenres, they don't. Okay, let's talk about the blurb. Try and do this one a bit more quickly. So we've got try and keep this into about 45 minutes. So the blurb, again, Mark, I'm going to say from the beginning, we're going to repeat ourselves here. The blurb needs to be crystal clear about the genre of the book. It's a really important thing it does. You almost need to say, this is an MI6 thriller book. This is a romance book set in a high school. You need to tell someone that they are in the right place if they like this sort of books. After you've done that, as well as re-establishing the genre again, that's when you can set some sort of conflict and tension. But one of the mistakes I made early on with the early drafts is not to end up rambling in your blurb. This is not a place for an essay about your book.
No, definitely not. And again, we see that quite often when people post their blurbs for comments, and often they'll be too long. So yeah, you'll definitely need to pay attention to that. It shouldn't be an essay. We're looking at 1, 2, maybe 3 paragraphs and short punchy sentences and all that kind of good stuff. But difficult to do. It's not easy to write a blurb. I struggle. In fact, I have someone in Salisbury actually who has worked professionally for the big four before, and she does those for me now, and does a much better job than I can, because it's just that's not one of my skills. But yeah, I can do it, but not as well as she can. Very
few people don't struggle with blurbs. I think it's very difficult to go from writing 100,000 word novel and then sum it up in 215 words, which is.
But, you can deconstruct it. I mean, a good tip again is to look at the ones that are selling in your genre, or an author that you think your books are a bit like. Maybe cut and paste them. Now, obviously, don't copy them, but you can cut and paste them, stick them in a document somewhere, and then study them. Just see exactly what those blurb writers have done. If there's anything in common with the blurbs across different authors. Those kinds of things. How many words are there? Is there an average word length? Maybe you want to stick to that. Don't go too long. Don't go too short. You can certainly learn and teach yourself, but again, it is something that you'll have to work at. It's not going to be easy.
Okay, so our tips for the blurb: must reinforce the genre, subgenre. Short, pithy is better than long and rambling, obviously. Give a reason to read, some sort of tension and conflict there, some intrigue, and again, reinforce the genre. Again, that's something you need to do just to let somebody know this is the book that they will like reading. Now, taglines. Not everyone uses taglines. You may not want to use one on the front cover, but they will come in useful down the line. They'll come in useful actually in advertising. But Susie K. Quinn's advice on this is to write your tagline before you start writing your book. In fact, Susie's advice is to get your whole book package in place before you start writing a book, to keep you focused on delivering the book that your tagline and your subgenre expectations are. So taglines are really good things to come up with. And I agree with Susie, actually, about coming up with them at the beginning of the book. Remember what this book is about. Do you use them on front covers, Mark? Have you used taglines before?
No, I don't. I don't think I ever have. I'll have my name and say a John Milton thriller will be that, and maybe the social review of X million copies. So will be the kind of the things that I have on the cover. If you've got a really amazing tagline that's really kind of triple A, then you could you can use it, or you could put it in the blurb, or you could use it on both if it's something that's really, really, really good. But I think taglines are even harder to write than blurbs, because you're trying to write something in probably 10 words that sums up something fairly fundamental about your book, and kind of hints at hidden depths. It's really difficult to do that. But again, I just actually pulled up the Helen is the name of my blurb writer, and she's just provided me one for The Avenger, which is the new Isabella Rose book. And so she wrote the blurb for me, which is 4 paragraphs. I'll tell you how many words. I can tell you how many words it is. It is 187 words. So pretty short. A little longer than normal, but still pretty short. And then she gives me 4 strap lines and things like, in a world of deep fakes and deception, who can you really trust? They can run, they can hide, but can they ever really escape? So is that kind of, thinking about those ways in a movie poster where you will see those kinds of things quite often. And they're useful, they're not essential, and they're very difficult to write, but, definitely worth having a go.
Yes. So even if you don't want to use it on the cover, definitely, as Mark says, worth coming up to focus your mind. And you'll find when you come to write your ad copy, which is a bit further down the line, very useful to go back to those taglines.
Very useful for ad copy, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, so to sum up those on the book package, always look at the charts to make sure you match your genre and reader expectations. And our top tip from Susie K. Quinn on this is to start with the book package before you've even written the book. One thing I'll finish on with that section is to imagine you're the reader who likes reading a certain type of book. Everything you do, whether it's the cover, the tagline, the blurb, your advertising copy, does it all match? Does it all align with each other? Or is there at one point a bit of a moment where they're going to go, oh, this is not really what I thought it was? That's what you want to avoid. So sometimes that idea that you're going to be different here, do things differently, can be a trap that won't serve you well. Okay, so that is the book package, Mark, which we've talked about here. If you want more details on that, I would recommend Susie's bestseller course, How to Write a Bestseller, which you'll find, I think, at selfpublishingformula.com/bestseller. But obviously, overall, the book package and everything you need for marketing is our 101 course, which is open at the moment, selfpublishingformula.com/101. Let's talk about something else that should be there for those early authors getting started. And it's probably never too early to start thinking about this. And it's a building block of an indie author's marketing network, setup, if you like, foundation. And that is a mailing list. I didn't really think about mailing lists before I came into this world. I realized when you started talking about it that I was on a ton of them. But I don't know how I thought that happened, whether I thought there was just Jeff Bezos wrote to me occasionally. But then I was introduced to this whole world of automations and sequences and lead magnets. And we're going to just deconstruct that for the last part of this podcast. First of all, Mark, I want to ask you, how important has your mailing list been in your success?
Yeah, it's very, very important. I sent an email out today. The Isabella book is available on the non-Amazon platforms today. So I have it up for 3 or 4 days before I take it off and put it exclusive to Amazon. So I want to tell readers who don't buy on Amazon that if they want to buy it, they need to buy it now. So send that out today. Then in a week's time, I'll send out the one saying that it's available on Amazon. And then it'll be around about the start of the month. I'll send out my monthly newsletter. So I'm contacting my readers there 3 times in the space of about 10 days, which is more than I normally do, but over the course of the year, it's still, they're not getting bombarded with emails. And generally speaking, I think most of my readers, well, I'll occasionally get emails from people saying that they enjoy the updates that they get. So it's a very important tool. It enables you to tell readers when something is available for them to read. And also, it's good to get out of the mindset or get into a slightly different mindset. You're not sending emails that are going to annoy people. Well, that shouldn't be what your aim is, obviously. You're sending emails to tell them about something that you think they might enjoy. So you're doing them a favor rather than being a pain. So it took me a while to realize that and to not be shy about emailing people. I used to be very shy before. I would, my finger would hover over the MailChimp send button, and I'd be like, I don't really want to send these emails because they're going to hate me. But if they hate me, then they can easily unsubscribe, and it would appear that. And again, I'm not unique. I'm sure most people will feel this way. And also, Most people, especially if they follow some of the kind of best practice when it comes to email, then it's not an imposition. You're bringing something welcome into the inbox of people who obviously like you because they've signed up for your mailing list. So it's good to get away from the potential embarrassment, and get into a different way of looking at things.
Yeah, and we'll talk about some of the detail in a second, but don't be afraid of allowing people to unsubscribe. It's part and parcel of a mailing list. It has to be there. When you use a proper mailing list provider, there'll be an unsubscribe button, and you can point people towards it. Because I saw Rachel McLean, actually, who's done a presentation for us in the past and been on this podcast, a Kindle Storyteller Award winner. She was saying, your quality of list is more important than quantity. It's the one area where saying I've got 10,000 on my list is almost meaningless if you've just trapped people with all sorts of gifts to get them on your list, and they're not quality people who don't want to be there. So
it's not meaningless. It's actually bad. It has a meaning. It's not going to do you any favors at all, because you'll be paying your provider per subscriber effectively, and if they're not quality subscribers, your sending reputation with that provider will be poor, because you're getting get lots of unsubscribes, you're getting low levels of engagement. These are all things that will suppress your emails rather than promote them. So yeah, it's not a good idea at all.
Another really important thing to say at the beginning of talking about mailing lists is that mailing lists are the only thing that you can properly own about your audience. Amazon have a lot of information on the people who like your books, and you can access some of it through the search terms once you've started advertising with them, but it's very limited. They're not going to hand over the names and email addresses of the people who read your books, however valuable they would be. It's a bit like being a trad publisher in the 1970s. If you wanted to get hold of your readers, how would you even begin to do that? Well, in the modern world of indie writing, this is how we do it. We do it by establishing a mailing list and encouraging our readers to join it. And then you own that remark, right? That's yours.
You do, yeah. It is a very, very valuable asset. I think it probably is the most valuable thing that you'll have, aside from your IP and the things that you're selling. It is going to be the best tool, better than kind of paid ads. The mailing list will be the best tool that you have in order to just send an email, make sales, make money, and that's. Once you realize that and you see how powerful they are, the kind of any delay in starting to build one becomes quite frustrating. I certainly, back in the early days, as I've mentioned before, I was not fast enough in building my mailing list and starting to find subscribers. Certainly spun my wheels for a little bit longer than I needed to, and probably missed a bit of a few months head start. But yeah, it's important.
So what do we use our mailing list for? Well, we use them for launching our books. We can use them for getting reviews, which are very important at the beginning. And we can turn some of those readers who are casually acquainted with us into fans of us because they feel a personal contact with us. And some of those fans will become very loyal, super fans, if you like. It's also a place, and I found this useful, to find technical readers of your book, people with experience. I think you've had the same experience, haven't you, Mark? People who know about the murky world that you write in, and have probably lived some of those lives. Incredibly useful and valuable for you when you're writing your next book.
Yeah, it's really, really valuable. So I've just been through that process with sending a book out for comments to the advanced readers, and one of my readers was fairly senior in the Russian embassy the American embassy in Moscow. So if I'm writing about what it was like to be in Moscow in the 90s, I have done. I've got lots wrong, because he said, well, actually, that wasn't how it was. And, and also beyond that, he's given me some anecdotes that I've been able to get into the books before, things that, kind of what was it like to be an American working in Russia as it came out from behind the Iron Curtain, and those kinds of things, the FSB following him, that these things really happen. And that's really great. And some of these stories, especially when they're true and you kind of lace them carefully into a book, then it readers can kind of sense that you haven't Googled that. It's something that there's an authenticity about it that is really compelling. And I wouldn't be able to have that kind of detail without the readers that do me the favor of feeding back on early books.
Yeah. And I'm in the same position. My second book is set in California in the 1960s. I'm not American. I've never lived in the States. Some of the cultural stuff that just won't occur to me, some of the language. I've got two former military pilots, and one person who worked as an engineer at Edwards Air Force Base. All three of them are reading and feeding back to me, and I'm finding that incredibly valuable. And that's come through my mailing list. So how do you build a mailing list? Well, I'm in the process of building mine. It is tough at the beginning. I'm going to remind you, Mark, it's tough at the beginning, particularly if you've only got one book. I don't have what we're going to call a lead magnet. We'll explain that in a second. So I only have about 800 names on my list, and that's taken a year and a half or so of building, but it is building every month at the moment. How do you do it? Well, you establish your mailing list using one of the platforms that's available. I don't know what term we use. Do you call mailing service providers or mailing list providers, or
email service provider usually? But yeah, it's something along those lines.
And the most famous one in the world is MailChimp, which for a long time had a very generous sort of starter package where you didn't even pay at the beginning, and you got some level of automation to use. Now, automation is once you start adding names to your list, they can automatically be sent some emails from you, which you write in advance. There are others now. MailerList might not be as attractive as it used to be with its pricing. MailerLite, I know, is a fan favorite in the SPF community. A lot of people use MailerLite. I've used it a bit, but it's not my main one. I use something called ConvertKit, which is an odd name, but that's their name, ConvertKit. And there's others. We should also mention author.email, author email, which is has been created by SPF community member Nick Thacker and others, I believe. So there's lots out there. In fact, there's a very long list if you Google it, but they're the key ones. And I think I would urge you to use one of the well-known, one of the ones we've mentioned. You're more likely to get help online and help from colleagues here in the community. So once you've got that set up, Mark, you've worked out some of the technical aspects of this. Where do you get names from when you first start?
There's lots of ways, really, but I mean, the best way is going to have something at the end of your book that people can learn about what you're offering, or if you've got nothing to offer, give them a reason to join up for information or community or camaraderie, whatever it is, and that will provide you with your gold standard of email subscribers, because you know that they've bought your book, they've read your book, they've got to the end, and they've still given you their email address. So that's a really good sign. There are other ways you can do it. You can advertise. Facebook's really good for finding readers. They're not going to be as good as the ones that have just read your stuff because they haven't read it yet. But I've built up a fairly large chunk of my subscribers came from 2 or 3 years of a continuous continuous Facebook campaign that worked pretty well. You can do swaps with other authors. So you could appear on my monthly newsletter. In fact, you have appeared on my monthly newsletter when your book launched, and you'd have had some readers of mine who would have bought your book, would have read it, got to the end, signed up. And if you were generous, and I noted that you haven't been yet, you could have mentioned my books to your subscribers, and then it's reciprocated. So that can work quite well. And even things like, you can, especially in the early days, I did this a bit, and there is an art to it, and it's not easy, but you can, something like Twitter, you could, someone engages with a post, or TikTok, for example. TikTok, let's be more relevant. You have a TikTok video, and you have, let's say you're lucky, like you've been a few times, and had 1 million views on a couple of your emails, a couple of your TikToks, and it'd be a good chance then another video going out to people who might have seen that, or offering them a free book, a free novella that the one that you're working on. That would be a really good way to accelerate the growth as well. So There are loads of ways, more ways these days to build a list than there were when I started, which is a good thing, really. It continues to get easier to build your list. Yeah.
And I copied an idea that you had of putting something at the back of your book that adds to the story, kind of behind the scenes sort of thing you used to get on a DVD. Once you finished watching the film, you could watch the director's commentary and so on, or deleted scenes. So I think you created this classified personnel file for your main character, John Milton, and I created a couple of vintage-looking air accident reports in the 1960s for the crashes that were described in my flight. And that gave me an email sequence to follow up on as well, some of that stuff. And I think that's worked really well. I'm probably getting, in reality, I think I worked out over the year 7% of the people I figured had read the book and moving on to the mailing list, which is a pretty good conversion rate.
Yeah, that's pretty good. Yeah.
Conversion rates online are very small, but most people on bigger businesses talk about less than 1%. those sort of percentages of getting people to do something is something. So that's worked really well for me. I did establish my mailing list before I'd published my first book, and we do get asked this a lot. When should I start a mailing list? And I think you should do it before you publish your first book.
Yeah, definitely.
Primarily because you get quite a learning curve out the way, and you're not faffing about with that once your book's out there. It gives you something to put at the back of the book when you first launch it. So there are lots of reasons for getting on board and learning the mailing list. Now, this is something that the 101 course excels at, because we have real hand-holding, step-by-step tuition in there of how to do this, how to set this up, how to create those automations, how to make a choice about an email service provider. Tom and I and others have done those courses, those particular modules. I know you've helped out there as well. So those fundamentals, those building blocks are the ones that we've wrapped up now. We're going to talk about today. Obviously, there is more to building your platform, but that's what I wanted to do for this episode, Mark. I wanted to talk about the book package and your mailing list, because I think from where I am now, which is book one on the edge of book two at the beginning of my career, looking back over the last couple of years, those are the two things that I wish I'd known more about when I started.
Yeah, they are very important, and once you, certainly the first bit is, that's the kind of the shiny packaging that goes around your book. But one thing you can't substitute is good writing and good stories. So I think it's pretty easy to sell anything once online. I think with the right ad you can sell anything really, and it's not that hard. But if what you're selling is not up to scratch, then you'll never sell to that person again. So that's that. I would very, very strongly recommend that we write our best books, make them as good as we can, and then when they're ready and we're confident that they are what we think that they are, what we're selling to readers, is then to find the ways to make sure that we make them attractive, and then get them into hands of people who are going to enjoy them. And then hopefully they come back for book 2 and book 3 and book 4. And then before you know it, you've got 1,000 fans and you potentially have a career as a writer, which is kind of cool, isn't it?
Which is very cool. Yeah. And that's what we want to hear. Okay. So where can you find out more details about the 101 course? selfpublishingformula.com/101. That is it, Mark. We have ratcheted up 40 minutes of just you and me talking. Let's start the old days. We used to do this more.
We never talk anymore, James.
Don't talk. You're so busy. I'm so busy. I'm going to Mallorca to cycle up a hill. I may not survive this weekend. A lot of hill climbing to do. But if I do, I'll see you next week.
Will do. That's ominous. So if you don't, it'll be me and John. So I can't, and God knows what that'll be like. Not enjoyable potentially.
I think it'll be hilarious. I'll listen to it from my hospital bed. Okay.
A book? What's a book?
Yeah. Thank you very much indeed. A package, you'll assume, is like wrapping it.
Yes,
exactly. A Christmas present. That's it. Poor old John. Thank you very much indeed. All that remains for me to say is it's a goodbye from him.
And a goodbye from me. Goodbye.
Get show notes, the podcast archive, and free resources to boost your writing career at selfpublishingshow.com. Join our thriving Facebook group at selfpublishingshow.com/Facebook. Support the show at patreon.com/selfpublishingshow. And join us next week for more help and inspiration so that you can make your mark as a successful indie author. Publishing is changing, so get your words into the world and join the revolution with The Self-Publishing Show.